Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, episode number 7 of Association Continuity in a COVID World. I see Jeff and Michael finally joined us. That's great. We appreciate that. My name is Craig Vaughn. I'm the president of Castle. For those of you who don't know Castle, we specialize in the management of HOAs and condos in Florida. We currently partner with approximately 300 associations through 7 offices and 1,750 teammates. I want to welcome back those of you who are rejoining us, and welcome to new webinar participants. Reminder, Rose, saying that you can chat in your question as we go through the presentation this afternoon, and I will try and work those into the discussion. Thank you very much for adjusting the time for today. We really did that just to make sure you were paying attention. And we promised not to ask who actually tried to log in at noon and found out that we weren't live at noon. So we'll skip that question, but we really do appreciate you adjusting the time today. We will be back at noon in 2 weeks. The other reason we wanted to change was we thought we may be better if you have a drink in your hand. And drinking at noon is sometimes inappropriate, but certainly having a drink at 4 is appropriate. So we want to see how you enjoy us more after having a drink, and look for those results in the survey. Back by popular demand this week is the polling feature. The feedback we receive from you is that you like hearing what everybody else is doing, so that you make sure you're not traveling this journey by yourself. So we'll use polling again today. We'll ask mostly the same questions so that we can get some trend data from week to week, and I'll share not only data, the results that we get, but I will also share kind of our week over week data. When the questions pop up, we encourage you to answer them quickly. They will come down in about 30 seconds so that we can get the results in your hands quickly. So let's start with our first question. Let's look at who is in the audience today. So Rose, if you could post question number 1. It's 2 parts. What type of community do you live in? And if you live in an HO, is your community a 55 or better community? And just to remind everybody, when I turned 55 at Castle, we went from 55 and older to 55 and better. So we like that description much better for associations. I want to welcome back Mike and Jeff this afternoon. Before I ask them to introduce themselves, I do want to remind everyone that they are not intending to provide specific legal advice for your association, just providing their thoughts on the discussions that were the items that we're discussing today. Questions, of course, specific to your association, please reach out to your individual advisors and legal counsel. Jeff, let me have you introduce yourself and the firm, and then I'll give over to Michael, and then we'll get going. So, Jeffrey.
Sure. Thank you again for hosting our 7th show together. Can't believe it. We're going to have an anniversary of 10 pretty soon before we know it. I was hoping this would be over by then. K. Bender Rembaum. We're 19 lawyers, about 25 staff. We represent over 1,400 community associations with offices in Palm Beach, Broward, Hillsborough, and Miami-Dade. We publish regularly Legal's Morsel, Rembaum's Association Roundup, as well as provide multiple educational seminars which take place throughout the month. If you receive our emails, then you certainly know our webinar calendar. Michael, anything to add to that?
Just want to say again, welcome everyone. Again, thanks to Craig and Castle. Good to see you, Jeff. And remind everyone, in addition to, I guess one thing Jeff normally says, which he didn't, was remind everyone, we have 9 of our attorneys are board certified specialists in this area. We're proud of that. And we look forward to sharing our, as Craig mentioned, our thoughts on what's going on today. So let's get started.
Outstanding. So we thought 2 weeks ago we were in a bad way with the trend of positive tests, and I don't think any of us expected us to be where we are. So it's an interesting backdrop for the discussion today. Rose, could you please post the results of who's in our audience today? So condos and co-ops, about 67% of the people, HOAs 33%, and of the HOAs, it looks like 38% are in 55 and better communities, and the rest in just the regular HOAs. That is about the same as we normally have, so my guess it's the number of returning people as well. Let me just run through the topics for today, everyone. We're going to have a current legislative update, and we do have a current legislative update this time, which is nice. We're going to revisit amenity reopening and just check in where everybody is. We're going to do the same thing with non-essential visitors. We're going to check in, see if there's been any changes with, with the current environment we're in. Talk a little bit about rules and enforcement. And then I really want to get to Q&A today. We have a bunch of quick hits, so a number of questions, very specific, asked in the registration that we will get to. So let's jump down to the current legislative update, if I can. Jeff and I will ask you, 2 weeks ago, we were sitting on pins and needles waiting for the governor to extend the emergency order, originally set to expire on July 7th. We called, he listened, and he extended the order, but can you tell us where we are with the emergency order, and quickly remind us what additional powers that gives boards?
We have until, Governor extended it on July 7th, as you referenced, until September 6th. So that's our new target date. It would be 60 days from the date of July 7th. So if my math is any good, that should take us to September 6th.
Maybe 5th.
See, there we go. It's already cut back. You took a day away from everybody.
Well,
right?
there's those damn 31 days in July and August.
There you go. That's why it's good to have partners, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
Right. Who starts drinking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Craig? I was thinking about that as you were doing this. And for these viewers, we almost met at 6
Most
o'clock.
property
tonight instead of
managers,
4 o'clock. So
Jeff, he goes, most property managers.
cute, very cute, most property managers. Great. None of the ones we're working with, however, I know that. There are so many powers granted because of the governor's state of emergency. You can conduct board membership meetings after giving notice as practicable under the circumstances as possible. You can cancel and reschedule emergency meetings. You can even designate and have officers who are not directors. You can relocate the principal office of the association if you need to. You can enter into agreements with counties if you need to, implement disaster plans. You have the ability, upon the advice of emergency management officials or the advice of a licensed professional retained by the board, determine whether the property can be safely inhabited or occupied. It's slightly different for HOAs and condos, rightfully so. You can mitigate further damage. And there's just so many more things you can do during the state of emergency when the governor has declared it and a board actually needs to use it. You can't use these powers just because you want to. You have to use these powers because you need to. And there's truly a difference between the two.
Jeff, I appreciate that. And I think, if I understand it correctly, Michael, there's some debate whether the emergency powers the emergency order, actually triggered emergency powers in 718, 719, and 720. Can you talk to us a little bit about that debate, and maybe, I know we don't want to speculate, but giving us some insight into how it might be clarified in the future?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, like as you pointed out, I think my belief, my understanding, and what I've seen is that I think a large majority of practitioners in our area do agree that the emergency powers remain in play because the state of emergency by the governor has been extended. The debate had to do with whether those emergency powers were triggered by a pandemic state of emergency as opposed to some other, like a windstorm type event. As you know, I don't like to speculate. I can tell you that there is action and active action being taken by industry leaders, attorneys throughout the state, as a group of those industry leaders are at present working on legislation to submit to Tallahassee. I know that as the Florida Legislative Action Committee, which I chair, we're also going to be working in conjunction with the bar on legislation that will hopefully clarify this. Unfortunately, my understanding is there's very unlikely to have a special session of the legislators prior to next year. So any legislation that would be considered wouldn't, let's hope this is in our past by that time.
Right. So,
and Craig, I'd like to add to that a little bit as well for those of our listeners that like to look at different cases. The Florida Supreme Court came out with a case just the other day, and the case number is SC 20-646. That's SC 20-646. And not going into the details of the case at all, because somebody was challenging whether the governor had the authority in the first place to enter into the state of emergency. But the Supreme Court says, and I'll quote, we conclude that a pandemic is a natural emergency within the meaning of section 252.34 subsection 8, and accordingly we further conclude that under section 252.361b, the governor had the authority to issue the executive orders to address the pandemic. So that made a lot of us feel better when the Florida Supreme Court extended this to natural emergencies as well, and the natural progression of that is the emergency powers in 7, 18, 19, and 20, chapters 7, 18, 19, and 20 Florida statutes. This Supreme Court order seems to give further justification for the board's use, if you will, of those powers.
I think that's great. I think that is great clarity. I guess I would remind everyone, there's still, in most situations, hurricane situations, we're very specific, an emergency meeting. What we're seeing is a more gradual, you can still respect due process to a large extent without having to trigger the emergency powers and the statutes in running the business of your association.
And Craig, I mean, I don't mean to jump in, but just on that point, I want to clarify, and I think this is important if we don't get to it later, and to your point on emergency, they are called emergency powers, but there's very little chance that there is an emergency that would preclude you board members and your management team from properly noticing these meetings. Board meetings, most of them are board meetings, to address the actions and issues you're taking. And so please don't, the emergency powers do not exclude you from noticing 48-hour notice of board meetings and possibly 14-day notice of board meetings, depending on what it is. Get with your counsel, get that guidance. So do not ignore that.
And also the members' right to speak. I mean,
Yep.
to the extent you can electronically have
speak,
the
yep.
members present, you also want to extend that opportunity to the membership as well. You want to comply with as much of the statute as possible under the circumstances.
Excellent guidance. Okay, well, we may get to that after a little more thoroughly, but I think that's good guidance. Okay, for our participants, I want to get to amenity reopening check-in, kind of the speed round of questions. So if you can be ready to answer the polls. First, for those who live in an HOA only, we want to know if you've opened your pool, clubhouse, and gym. So if you can answer those right away, that would be great. And I will tell you, when we asked this question last week, approximately 61% of HOAs had opened their pool, 30% had opened their gym, and only 6% had opened their common areas. So that was the kind of trailer from an HOA standpoint. I know in our world, for Castle, most associations still weren't doing anything in their clubhouses at this point. Can you close that poll, Rose, and let's see what we have? So if you live in an HOA, we have approximately, it's about 60-40, and so it's about the same percentage in an HOA of those who have opened your pool. Of course, I'll take out the NAs and do some quick math, but it looks like kind of 60-40 in terms of percentages for pools. If you've opened your gym, most people have not opened their gym still, about the same 40% hadn't opened their gym. And for the clubhouse, again, very few people hadn't opened their clubhouse. So from an HOA standpoint, we have more than 50% of the pools open, a smaller number of gyms, and a real few number of clubhouses. Rose, will you post poll question number 3 if you can? So we'll go to condos and co-ops now. So if you live in a condo and co-op, have you opened your pool? Have you opened your gym? Or have you opened your common rooms? Just while we're going through that poll, again, this was the speed round for webinar participants, so I appreciate getting on there quickly. Last week for condos, 83% had opened their pools, 52% their gyms, and 23% their common areas. So far higher percentages than what we saw in HOAs. So I think we have everybody in. Can you close that, Rose, and we'll see what our results are? Wow. Guys, 85%, almost 90% of people who have a pool in a condo have their condo pool now open. With respect to the gym, about 50-50 with respect to the gyms, was again what we saw last week. And then it looks like a fewer number of common rooms open in in condos and co-ops. We're still seeing a lot of stuff that's closed down, which I think is a worry of some associations, you know, as they continue to make tough decisions to not open their facilities. I'm going to go to one more, Jeff and Mike, before I ask you. Can we just quickly look at the 55 and better communities? So those of you in a 55 plus or 55 and better community, let's see what you are doing with respect to your pool, gym, and common areas. Give you a second there. You know, we're gonna jump into just a reminder of some of the regulations affecting the pool openings. We're getting a number of questions. We just really want to, from an affirmation standpoint, confirm that you guys have it right. But let's just quickly look at the poll rows for HOAs, 55 and better HOAs. With respect to the pool, you know, 80%, maybe 70, 75, 80% of the pools in HOAs are open. That's greater than last time. Can you just move the thing over, sorry? That's slightly greater than last time where we saw fewer pools open. Your gym, small number of gyms, and look at, it looks like even from a clubhouse standpoint, fewer than 2 weeks ago. So maybe indicating that some people are starting to shut down their amenities, and we'll talk about that a little bit again shortly. Rose, thank you very much. Jeff, I want to get to you. You know, we can't talk about the regulations in every community, in every county, in every municipality, because they are different. 71% of our participants today are in the Palm Beach, Broward market. So I just want to touch base. In Palm Beach, can you just remind us of the regulations that are affecting pool openings in place? Specifically asking you to address pool monitoring. You know, is it required? Who can do it?
Sure. I was all ready to talk about face masks, but we will talk about pools. And no, you don't have to wear your face mask in the swimming pool. We do get that question from time to time, so we'll get that out of the way. When we talk about swimming pools in Palm Beach County, we have three subjects we have to address. We have to address the requirements, the notice requirements, and the compliance requirements. So first, the general requirements. We'll do that one first. Pool capacity is limited to the amount of people that social distancing can still be complied with. So that is your maximum capacity of the pool. Can everybody that's in the pool maintain CDC social distance guidelines, meaning a 6-foot bubble around the individual? Locker rooms and restrooms must remain, or locker room and shower facilities must remain closed. Restrooms may remain open and must be cleaned and disinfected regularly. Pool deck seating and lounging, again, the same requirement to ensure social distance in compliance with the CDC guidelines. So that takes care of our requirements. Now we have notice that must be provided to everybody. Staff that is authorized to manage the community pool, or the management company, the volunteers, board members, or any other authorized persons must provide notice, either electronically, by mail, or by posting at the community pool or any other place where your messages are traditionally displayed the following: all users of the community pools shall abide by any and all social distancing guidelines, including but not limited to the CDC guidelines, and that said users of community pools bear the responsibility of such compliance and assume the full risk of utilizing the community pool. And then we come into the compliance stage. The compliance requirement must be accomplished by any reasonable means, including but not limited to periodic spot checks. You can do them by video. You can do them through electronic monitoring. You can do them through compliance hotlines to allow for reporting of violations that, and here's the key, are thereafter promptly investigated. So it's not enough just to provide a phone number for an owner to call from the pool deck. You also then have to have a way to promptly investigate in the event someone calls and complains about a non-compliance issue that may be going on. So in recap, remember, we have the requirements themselves as to what you must do if you open your pool. You've got the notice and signage requirements. We like the idea of both posting that signage at the pool and sending it to the members. You can't do it too much. And then finally, the compliance issue. You at the leaders have to maintain that compliance.
Excellent. And Michael, before I get to you, I just wanted to answer a quick question I had a couple people chat in that the number, the percentages we were giving on the amenity openings were different than what was showing on the screen. I was quickly backing out the NAs to get an idea of what.
Is that what you were doing? Okay.
Yeah,
I picked up on it.
That's the CPA background, so I apologize.
Right.
But
Took me a minute, but I picked up on it after.
So Jenny, specifically for you, I was doing some internal math to get the number. So Michael,
Yes.
jumping into Broward, tell us about Broward.
Yeah. Well, Broward's order is far less detailed than Palm Beach County, so it's good that they all work together on these things. But Broward's order, and they reiterated this order most recently when they added the face mask requirements. Pools and pool decks are used only by current residents. This actually is one difference in Broward, I believe, than Palm Beach. Broward is only allowed to be used by current residents of the housing development and their families, but they're only if their families, that the board has authorized the use by families who are not residents. So if you are a resident of the condominium, of the community association, you may use the pool deck. Non-resident family members only if the board has properly adopted a rule that allows for that. 6-foot social distancing guidelines need to be adhered to. Pool deck, pool occupancy are limited to no greater than 50% capacity. And Broward has the either or option. Broward says that you either remove all furnishings from the pool deck, or the use of the pool deck and pool are supervised by a, quote, sufficient number of employees or other persons designated by the housing development during the hours in which they are used to ensure compliance with the requirements that I just read. Employees and other designees of the housing development are to sanitize the facility's pool chairs, railings, gates, tables, showers, and other equipment at the pool and pool deck on a, quote, regular basis. By the way, that shower is the shower that you'd have outside by the pool. It's not a shower inside a restroom. Hot tubs remain closed. Okay, and they must not. And so that's the whole requirement in the Broward County order. Signage is not something that is set forth in the order, but certainly recommend signage similar to what they recommend in the Palm Beach County order be in place. Communicating with your management team, communicating with your insurance team and agent as well to confirm with your liability carriers as to what type of language that they would prefer to see to help insulate or better protect the association.
Excellent.
And I'm sorry, and I should add one thing about with the pool decks. Broward County does have the facial mask covering requirements inside. Outside, it is, again, we talked a couple weeks ago, it's not 100% clear. I would say that masks should be worn when you're going to the pool deck. When you're on the pool deck, as long as you can social distance, and this is along the lines what Jeff said, if you can social distance from people who are not residing in your unit, then that would be okay, but otherwise you should be masked. Boards, you may adopt rules that mirror that or are stricter than that, but do them properly. And then know if you can enforce them, which we'll get to.
And I would also add to Palm Beach County, because they came out with the pool opening requirements separately than the facial mask requirements. And in Palm Beach County, you're going to want to wear facial masks inside of any common area or outside any common area, inside the common condominium building and the common elements as well, when social distancing is not possible. So if you're the only person on the elevator, you don't have to wear the mask. But I imagine
Palm Beach County.
In Palm Beach County, if
Broward,
someone comes
it's
in
not.
that elevator, you're going to have to wear that mask because you won't be able to maintain the 6-foot distance more than likely.
Broward is different, guys. Broward is mandates inside, regardless of social distancing.
So we won't even get into Miami, which has a 180-page manual on what to do. I think if you are in Miami and listening and have a question, I would call your attorney. Is exactly what I would do. Your management company and your attorney can help you out. So we won't go down that road.
If I could, Craig, I will only add that Miami-Dade is similar to Broward as far as the facial mask requirements, although they're a little bit stricter, in fact, and for good reason.
Right. Rose, before I get to a quick question for Jeff, can you please post poll question number 5, and we'll comment on it after. But for everybody there, have you reclosed your pool is what we're asking everybody. So Jeff, frequently asked question, my pool is open. Do I need to have a restroom open? Can you comment for us?
Sure. The Florida Administrative Code, I believe it's chapter 64, subsection E9, would require the restroom to be open if the pool is open. So that's more in the nature of a commercial requirement, but nevertheless does apply to our condominium and homeowner association swimming pools. So a community pool, if you will. So from that perspective, yes, restrooms need to be provided. Part of the reason why is so that people don't decide to use the pool. So it's a safety and it's a health issue as well. So formally speaking, that is the case. Informally, I know that there probably are a few associations out there that can't comply with the requirements necessary to have the restroom open. The legal advice would be then to close your pool and the restroom at the same time, though I'm sure there are some associations with just the pool and not the restroom open, and that's just a risk tolerance decision.
Right. Excellent. Okay,
Exactly.
thank you. Michael, anything to add?
Nope. Perfect.
Rose, if you could post the results, please, of our poll. So it looks like 2 weeks ago when we asked the question, 5% of those who answered indicated they were kind of walking back their reopening plan, and it looks like we're kind of in the same area, maybe a few more, but most people are steady as she goes at this point in time as we adjust to this new normal, I guess. Guys, one of the things we are telling our clients as they consider closing or even opening their amenities is, would you rather defend your decision to close the amenities or keep them closed, or defend a lawsuit from a resident who claimed to get coronavirus because they were in your open amenity? And so it's an interesting discussion. And I think the other thing I would say in this regard is, there's lots of pressure from the vocal minority in your community to, change what you're doing. And I would highly advise we advise our clients, steady as you go. It's like, stay the course if you think that's the right thing to do.
Right.
Guys, let's check in on non-essential visitors now. So we're going to ask these questions to the three subsets, the HOAs, the co-ops and condos, and the 55 and better communities. Of course, under the emergency powers that we earlier discussed, the board was able to adopt rules limiting access to the community. In most cases, the associations did adopt rules. We've seen the walking back of those restrictions over the last couple of webinars. So I'd like to ask our webinar participants, so for HOAs, if you could post poll question number 6. For HOAs, if you live in an HOA, are you allowing contractors, realtors, family members, and non-essential guests? Last week when we did this, you'll recall there are more communities letting in realtors than family members. That was a little bit of a head scratcher, but we'll see what we have this go around. So 2 weeks ago, for HOAs, approximately 90% were allowing contractors, realtors, and family.
Yeah, they were high numbers.
61% non-essential visitors. Guys, let's end the polling here and share the results if you can, Rose. Boy, even with the kind of explosion of positive tests, look at all the 93% of HOAs are allowing contractors, 89% realtors, families jumping up, which is nice. And then there's some limitations still on the non-essential guests. Guys, any comments on those numbers?
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, with HOA, we don't know the breakdown. I'm going to presume these are single-family homes, and so that really doesn't surprise me. In a single-family home environment, gated or not gated, I think that I would expect that people are going to be allowed to do what they want. It's more the amenities, like if they have shared amenities, that I could see still being closed.
Michael, I think that's a great comment in HOAs. Let's look at condos, because that may be more telling, where there's more, everybody's living under the same roof. So Rose, same question for the condos.
Yeah, these results surprised us last time.
These did result, and then I will remind everybody last time that we had 90% allowing contractors, realtors, and families again, and about 70%, 65% allowing guests. So let's just give our webinar participants a second to check in and have.
Craig, with that in mind and those numbers in mind, is it any wonder that COVID is on the rise. And I don't mean to suggest that because we're allowing contractors, realtors, family in the condominiums, that's to blame for the rise, but it does show an indication of what's happening in the mindset of society overall. And there's a lot more human interaction taking place, and then the COVID is going to transfer a lot more as well.
I completely agree. It is just a matter of exposure, right? Rose, interesting. You could share those results.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a little scary for us, but it looks like all 88 people voted on this, which is great. What is interesting is those are high numbers in my view, given the circumstances that we're under right now. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and Craig, also on the realtors, it's interesting because when COVID first came out and the buildings closed down, and a lot of condo associations had a blanket rule: no contractors, no outside guests, no realtors. About maybe 2 weeks ago, when you first did this polling, the estoppel requests, both to the management companies and also the ones crossing our desk, they were an incredible number. Like a big surge came through all at once. And I think that's the result of all of a sudden the realtors getting access again and the closers trying to close those deals.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. We're seeing the same thing over here at Castle. Well, we post these results so you in the audience can get an idea of what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, one thing we don't know, of course, is and we talked about this a couple weeks ago too, is these openings, are they subject to certain restrictions? I'm going to presume they are. I'm going to certainly hope they are, to the point you gentlemen were talking about. Certainly people should be required to be wearing masks. They're limiting the number of people who are coming in. They are sanitizing the high touch areas, especially in the common elements of these condominiums, to keep those numbers down. I mean, thankfully, Jeff mentioned we do represent quite a few communities. I've had a very small percentage of condominium associations who have contacted us to report positive cases. That doesn't mean they've all reported to us, but there haven't been a lot. So I credit, I think there's a lot of good work being done by these board members and management team in trying to limit these exposures.
Yeah, Mike.
Well, and it's funny, I'm getting a lot of phone calls from our the associations I regularly deal with a lot of COVID exposure.
Really?
And what to do and things like that. Yeah, I've actually in the last 2 weeks, I've received more of those type of calls than I have at any other time since we've been doing these webinars.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but I mean, I went from very little to like almost none to maybe like half a dozen, but still, to me, that's a small number.
We're getting a lot in our world, and it's not all residents. A lot, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, but
right.
Vendors.
That's more of that. Staff and vendors I've gotten more of.
Yeah. So we'll take those down. I think, guys, Michael, I think you raised a great point. We have, 95% back to normal in terms of who's coming in, probably not back to normal in terms of what rules and restrictions are being forced into or have been adopted to control, what their access looks like. So anyway, good data for our listeners. Guys, I want to jump into rules and enforcement. We continue to get a number of questions about associations adopting rules and how they may enforce them, whether it be wearing masks, use restrictions, access, the things we just talked about. Associations have tools, but what I want to walk through is a specific example. So let's assume we have a properly adopted rule requiring the wearing of masks in the clubhouse. We have a resident, Mr. Smith, who just will not wear a mask when he's in the clubhouse. Jeff, what's our best course of action? How can we address this issue?
Peer pressure is a nice way of sometimes bringing about a change in behavior. But that issue aside, when an association has properly adopted a rule, then the association also has the right to fine. It has the right to do use right suspensions. They could, if they follow the process, deactivate the card, the access cards if it's controlled electronically. At the end of the day, I think what we're trying to do is not create a perfect, I wish everything worked perfect, right? Everybody wore their mask when they were supposed to. But I think at the end of the day, the board also needs to be reasonable. Just how much effort do we want to put into Mr. Smith, who's a schmuck who refuses to wear the face mask? So if we get substantial compliance, is that good? I think it is. Do we want to prevent Mr. Smith, who's not wearing the mask, from coming in to the clubhouse, from coming into the pool area when everybody else is wearing one and this schmuck isn't? then, and sorry if anybody out there is named Mr. Smith, I'm not picking on any particular
He's
person,
not on task.
but at that point, I would want that person immediately suspended. Typically, right, what we need to do is follow the process, which would be the board to render a decision. Hey, this is a rule breaker. We want to suspend his use rights. We're going to put him on a use right suspension. Can't use the clubhouse amenities, can't use the pool. Then that owner is supposed to get a 14-day notice that the compliance committee is going to be meeting. And then the compliance committee can only say yes. And if they say anything other than yes, if they modify it, it's a no. If they modify what the board has decreed, it's a no. And obviously, if they say no, it's no. And that's the normal process. But in a situation of COVID-19, and Michael, this is an interesting one I don't even think you and I have discussed. If we have a blatant violator and the guy just isn't wearing his mask, and we'll make it even more so that the individual is coughing and maybe he's sneezing, whatever the case may be, just to amp up the fact pattern a little bit. I think under the emergency powers, the board would be well within its rights to deactivate that card under the health, safety, welfare powers in order to protect the property and protect the people, more so to protect the existing occupants who are complying. What do you think?
I mean, it's an aggressive approach, and it basically throws the ball back into the court of the violator to see what type of action it's very hard for them, in my opinion, to defend themselves, unless, of course, they have a documented exception to having to wear the mask. But we're presuming for purposes of this discussion that, as Jeff said, Mr. Smith is just a schmuck. But I will say this, I think it's very important when we're talking about rules and rule enforcement, and when you're adopting rules, and obviously there's a proper process, and you definitely want to communicate with your counsel and make sure T's are crossed and I's are dotted so that you can enforce these. I will tell you once don't adopt rules you're not going to enforce, uniformly. And I agree, Jeff. I understand you're saying substantial compliance. The idea here is, in my opinion, certain rules need to be uniformly enforced. And if someone is being, and I think when you added your additional facts, Jeff, to me, that actually raises a level of the situation to where you reach out to in addition to doing your whole compliance, and if you can suspend use rights, and communities who don't have grievance committees, if I understand people not wanting to find their fellow owners and things, but this is a perfect time to get 3 volunteers who are there simply to say, if you're not going to follow these basic rules, just wear your mask, we're going to suspend your use rights. I think this is the perfect opportunity to try to get everyone to understand this isn't a political thing. This is simply, let's be selfless, not selfish. Let's help not spread. But if you have someone who is being that aggressive, or that antagonistic, another option is certainly to send it over to your counsel. There's a violation now of your governing documents. A formal demand comes from our office or from the office of your counsel, and that formal demand lets the individual know that if they don't comply, that we will be seeking legal action. And if you're talking in Jeff's scenario, to me, that definitely could rise to the level of need for an emergency injunctive relief. Now you have it, because if this person is actively doing what they're doing, who knows if they're positive or not? That's a threat to the health, safety, welfare. And I think you might convince a judge. Now, it depends on the judge. It depends on the county you're in. It depends on the facts of the case. There's a lot of things that are specific to this, but it is something to consider. And hopefully the threat of the possibility, because you're going out telling this owner, listen, because the letter's coming from me, you need to comply. And if you fail to comply and we have to go to court to get your compliance, you're not only going to have to comply, you're going to have to reimburse the association for the couple of $1,000s or more that they had to spend to file this court action simply to get you to wear a mask. So how about just put on a mask?
Yeah, I think you're applying common sense rules, which doesn't always work in our world.
And that's why you throw in. That's why you throw in the money threat. That's where you add the financial threat, the economic threat to the individual as well. Fining is one level, but having to go to court and then have them have to pay. There's a risk. Of course, there's risk to the association. If the association pursues that and the individual retains an attorney and somehow the court doesn't agree, well, now the association could be on the hook. But I mean, hopefully it doesn't get that far. Hopefully, quote unquote, reasonable minds understand. We're asking you to follow this simple rule.
Jeff,
I want to add to that a letter from us, a letter from the lawyer. It's amazing how many times that brings about a change in behavior all by itself. One strongly, properly worded letter, and a lot of problems go away just because of the we see that every day with the demand letters we send out. They bring
Right.
out a change in behavior. Substantial compliance, that comment was really, I was thinking in my mind about the poor front desk person who's having to make sure everyone that's coming in, the contractor, the guests, and they're not social distancing and they're not wearing the mask. So how far out do we want that front desk person to go in seeking the compliance? And I don't think that we want our employees, our board members, even the unit owners themselves getting in someone who isn't complying, getting in their face too severely, too strongly. I'm concerned about the repercussions of that.
I agree. I think if you have a management team, you're reporting violations to the manager. The front desk individual is told, presumably, hey, notify them of the requirement. Here's a mask, please put it on. If they refuse to, document it. And this is what we
turn
talk
this back over to
about.
Craig,
Document the report, get your reports, and put in place, and then follow the chain of command. In this case, have violation notices sent out. You're going before the compliance committee. Get it over to the attorney, as we talked about. Absolutely avoid avoid the need to ramp this up. And you tell your board members too. You can't. If there's an owner who's very passionate about the situation, you'd like them to be passionate in a respectful way, as far as, hey, wear a mask. Maybe they had a family member who's sick, and they're like, if you would simply wear a mask, we wouldn't have this. But I think that's very important. Documenting the violations, being able to enforce them in that regard. And I agree with Jeff, and that was my point. The letter from the law firm, if it gets to that point, and the threat, and the real threat, a reasonable, legitimate threat that they may be responsible to reimburse the association thousands of dollars simply because they didn't want to put on a mask as they went through the lobby to go outside, hopefully will do the trick.
And also, I would add to that, I'm getting some comments from chat from Erwin, and Erwin makes a really good point. Hey, some of us don't have the grievance committee. And if you don't have the grievance committee, then you're not going to be able to formally do the use right suspensions. You're not going to be able to formally do the fining. Don't forget you have other options. In addition to the attorney letter, where we can try to put the fear of the court system into the individual, there's also local police department, health department, CDC, and don't avoid those possible remedies or those possible individuals that can help bring about a remedy.
Yeah, guys, I think you made some great points, which is, a lot of associations don't have the fining grievance committee, so they can't really fine. There are other tools. I think it's kind of like we always use the towing the car example. All you need to do is tow one car and you'll solve your problem.
Right.
What you need to do is send one demand letter from the attorney advising that if this continues, we're going to go seek an injunction, you're going to pay fees, has great impact. So I think that's exactly the guidance.
You could redact the name, Craig, redact the name of the recipient, and post the letter in a common area where people see it, so that everybody walking by sees what's happening. Sees that the board isn't taking it laying down.
I think what we're reading in the comments is a lot of frustration around we can't do anything. We look the other way, then we kind of defeat the purpose of having a rule.
That's right.
And then the COVID numbers go up.
Right. Well, and I'm glad Jeff added that, though. I think, again, I'll reiterate, I recognize we have communities we don't have a grievance committee, nobody wants to do it because nobody wants to fine their fellow neighbor. Well, this isn't about finding. I don't even care if you make it just to try to get 3 people who are not directors, officers, employees, or spouses or children of them to sit at a table and say, if you don't wear your mask, we're going to approve the board suspending your use rights. Very limited, maybe, but also reaching out, like Jeff said, to your local authorities, to the health department. They, according to these orders that are issued by the counties, they are to enforce them, and there is monetary penalties and there's threats of jail. Quite frankly, I will remind everyone, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, when you speak to your code compliance officers, do clarify with them, if we have an individual we're trying to get compliance and they refuse to, and we call you out, who's getting cited? Are you going to cite that individual, or are you going to fine the association? Because that's a problem. And if the association's getting fined, that's something I mentioned last time. I'll reiterate, guys, look to update your documents so that you can have, maybe the membership will support the fact that if an individual, if you don't already have it, if an individual causes financial harm to the association has the right to go ask after them to reimburse as an individual assessment. So if they don't pay you, you can put a lien on their unit or on their parcel. That's better. That's different than just saying you have to reimburse us and having to go to small claims. That's a lot more. So there are options. Speak to your counsel about all of these. get with experienced counsel who can give you these types of options, and because this isn't going away in the next week or two. And these situations we're discussing, they don't only apply during pandemic. They apply outside of the pandemic when you have rule violators, when you have people causing damage to the community. So these will benefit you on a going forward basis as well.
I think the answer is don't get frustrated, take action. There's lots of things you can do, it sounds like. So good for you. Okay, guys, we're going to go through kind of a series of quick hits questions that, I know how hard it is, Jeff, for you to give a short answer, but to the extent you guys give short answers to these, we'll get.
What about Mike?
I'm kidding you. Let's start with meetings. What effect do the emergency powers have on notice and participation requirements for board meetings?
Sure. And again, we kind of covered that in the beginning of the meeting today. You want to give as much notice as practicable under the circumstances. If you can fully comply with the 48 posted board meeting notice, then you should absolutely post your board meeting notice 48 hours in advance. If you have to make decisions quickly because of the COVID-19 matter for one reason or another, then you do what you have to do, and you're going to end up ratifying it later at a properly noticed board meeting. You want to encourage member participation. You want the members to know what's going on. And this is it's almost like a group activity as we go through this COVID-19 debacle together. So I think the more opportunity the members have to know what's going on in the minds of the board, the happier the general welfare of the entire community is going to be.
Excellent. Michael, with respect to meetings, again, we have a lot of boards using the Zoom platform for meetings. Is it acceptable to hold meetings using these types of platforms? Excuse me. And what requirements does the board have to meet in order to have a properly conducted meeting through Zoom, say?
Sure. Well, yes, the short answer is yes. Board meetings in particular you've been allowed to attend board meetings as board members electronically, either video or telephonically, and that counts for quorum, and you can vote that way. And so these meetings continue in that regard. Membership meetings, committee meetings, board meetings, all can be done on this platform. And I think in certain communities, you don't have meeting spaces to hold meetings where you can do it in a level of comfort and following CDC guidelines. So, but the important aspect when you're using these types of formats, and Jeff and I both pointed it out, and Jeff just reiterated again, is the members are allowed to attend and speak on agenda items. So if you're going to hold meetings in an electronic format, you have to have the ability to let the membership attend, meaning when you, on your notice, date, time, and your location is now going to be your Zoom invite, the same way you had for today's webinar. You're going to put your Zoom invite, and you're going to allow this people in. Now in a Zoom meeting format, there are ways for the host to be able to control so people can come in, they're all muted. And as you do in a regular board meeting, and it's actually have a little more control in a Zoom meeting, members are entitled to speak on agenda items when they're asked to speak. It's not a free-for-all. So, but they do have the opportunity, and I guess there's the hand-raising function and things of that nature. So, but it's important that if you're holding your board meetings in this regard, you're making sure the membership is invited to the same way the board members are invited, and that they're allowed to attend, and at each and on the agenda items, ask questions, ask for discussion before the board votes. Motion, second, discussion on the table. Put it out to anyone on the phone or anyone on the call who wants to have a question or comment, and before you bring it back for the vote. Now you're in compliance with the requirements. Membership meetings also can be done this way. A little bit more of a challenge with membership meetings, of course, because when you're doing voting, voting on amendments, voting on waiving reserves, voting on material alterations, all of those are advanced voting in advance. You're sending out primary proxies. Maybe you're doing electronic voting. That's helpful. There are companies out there to do electronic voting. I think it's probably should be, they should be happy people right now. But there are requirements to do that, put that in place for electronic voting. Get with your council, because you have to have a board resolution. You have to put certain things in place. You get permission from for electronic consent, things of that nature. So it's absolutely within Florida guidelines, but you need to know what to do to make sure you're following the statutes.
And Mike, I want to piggyback on that just a little bit. If you're in an association and you haven't sent to your membership yet the opportunity to receive all of your official notices electronically rather than US mail, and to opt into an electronic voting system, then I think you're really behind the times now. So for any association out there that hasn't done that yet, it's really time to
At
take
least
advantage
propose it.
of the
Yeah.
technology that's out there, especially in light of what's happening with COVID.
Yeah,
And
we're
at least
seeing-
have it as an option,
we're
because
seeing-
go,
Yeah.
it's an option. Electronic voting doesn't replace paper voting, but it's an option, and it does allow for a lot more participation. The one thing people need to recognize, I personally think this is helpful, but not owners agree. When you ask them to consent to receive notices electronically, like Jeff said, that makes their email part of the official records. And so some people frown on that because they don't want their email accessible to everyone, but you can always block people. It's just a lot easier for you to get communications from your community. And I think it really opens up a level of communication, which is something, if we want to look for silver linings in this pandemic, it's the efforts I know that, Jeff and I and our firm has been encouraging, and I know Castles have been encouraging, is more open communication. You're allowed to, these Zoom meetings allow a lot more people to attend.
I
Sure
think
do.
we're seeing a lot of that. I think you missed the definition of quick, but that's okay. I would ask one quick follow-up, and then my question will be quick. On a Zoom, can you chat in questions? Is that acceptable participation by a resident?
I would rather not. I would rather the individual have the right to use their voice, their vocal cords, and address the entire Zoom audience. If that is not possible for one reason or another, then I suppose the chat channel is there and it could be used, but it certainly isn't my preferred method.
Okay. So guys,
The statute says speak.
yeah, okay. And so you can have them, you don't have to do anything special to start having Zoom meetings. They got to be properly noticed, have to comply with all the rules. I would say that they are not going away. One of the things that it's one of the tools that we've seen now be very successful with respect to encouraging board meetings and participation. What about recording them?
What about it?
Florida is a two-party state, meaning both the recorder and the recordee have to give their consent. Obviously, we know that an HOA board meeting and member meeting, however, can be recorded. The member has a statutory right, so that's going to take priority over the two-party giving their consent. They already have the ability to record the meeting. So what's the difference if they're there with a camcorder versus recording the Zoom meeting with this exception? The camcorder you see. The Zoom meeting, maybe there's just a red dot. I think that the board needs to say in advance, if that meeting is being recorded through the controller of the Zoom platform, that our meeting is being recorded. This meeting is being recorded.
If it's the board recording it, there could be, and one of the things to that point, Craig, all three, 7, 18, 19, 20, I think all condo co-op HOA you can adopt reasonable and should adopt reasonable rules and regulations governing the meeting conduct. One of those is, hey, if you want to record, we need to provide 24-hour notice to the board that you want to record the meeting. And this way, and then so someone says, hey, I'm going to be recording, great. At the beginning of the meeting, that's announced. We have, owner Smith, sorry, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith, we're picking on you. Owner Smith has properly noticed that they're going to be recording this meeting, so we're letting everybody know the meeting's being recorded. I think Jeff's right, though. If the board is going to record meetings for whatever reason, then they should say, by the way, the meeting's being recorded.
Okay. Guys, I'm going to jump to temperature taking. I'm sure you're getting inquiries from some of your boards. Can the board adopt a rule with respect to taking of temperatures for guests entering the building and deny?
Craig, can you get a little closer to the screen so I can get your temperature?
Yeah, I would say the answer is, can they? Yes. Should they? My opinion, I think that is not the best idea. For a couple of reasons. Number one, the fact that someone has or doesn't has a no fever doesn't mean that they're not carrying the virus. The fact that someone might have a slight fever doesn't mean they don't have a tooth infection. Right. And then you also have a situation where the individual who's holding that, maybe they're not using the machine correctly. Maybe there's a low battery. There's a whole. To me, what it does is it potentially adds a risk to the association who's saying, hey, look, we're doing temperature checks when you're, it's and they're not doing it right. So I'd say, yes, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Jeff, you agree? Okay. Well,
I'm somewhere between, yes, you can, you don't recommend it, and yeah, maybe it's not such a bad idea, but I agree with Mike that it's not a foolproof system. And the battery could be low, and the individual could be an inch too far back when they're using the temperature gauge. Plus, the temperature readings are different than a regular thermometer. Plus, it's not medically trained personnel, not that you need to be to use one of these. So I think it gives an indication, but it's certainly not foolproof. I mean, it's foolproof by any sense of the imagination. So is it really worth it at the end of the day?
Great
And I think
point.
that's what Mike is kind of saying. Is it really
It
worth
is
it?
what
It's
I
not,
said. Yeah,
you
that
know,
was your opportunity
yeah.
for a quick, yes, I agree with Mike, Jeff. You missed it.
Well, you know, there'll always be 2 weeks
Guys,
from now we can try
waivers.
again.
Some associations continue to have residents using the amenities, or guests or contractors sign waivers. Does it really protect the association? Jeff, let's start with you and see if Michael just agrees with what you say.
Well, it's better than nothing. In terms of using the waivers, self-help waivers like that are sort of not looked at favorably by the Florida courts. In addition, if you are requiring a member to sign a waiver to use an amenity that they already have a right to use, that could be problematic unless the declaration says the association has that right. And I have had clients that have asked me to go back and amend the governing document so that they do have the right to ask for those waivers to use the amenities. And I think then the association is on much better standing to say, if you don't sign this, you can't use the gym. But if they already have the gym and they don't have anything in the governing documents that give the authority for that, then, you know, if you can see the fish through the ice, you know you're on thin ice, as they say. So
I will make it a very quick ad. The only thing I will remind everyone is if they signed a waiver and you are negligent, that waiver is not going to insulate you. So, you know that.
right,
You know,
it's not
waiver
going to insulate
doesn't
me
insulate you
their
from
own
this. So if the
negligence.
association is
Yeah.
negligent, they're not properly cleaning, not doing things they're required to do, having someone sign a gym waiver isn't going to insulate the association from their own liability for negligence.
Well, I'm glad that was your short one.
Yeah, Michael,
That was pretty good.
You raised both good points, and I will say, I think one of the biggest fears, you know, that our associations have is if you open the amenities and adopt these cleaning protocols, you better make sure you're doing them, because you can only get into trouble when you're not. I mean, you get into trouble when you are, but you can really get into trouble if you say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to clean every 3 hours and then don't show up and clean. I think that causes a huge risk.
And document it.
Good point, and document it. Guys, maintenance fees, 2 questions. One, our amenities have now been closed for 4 months. Should we get a credit against our dues?
No.
Dues?
No.
Quick answer, no and no. We'll move on to the next set of that. So no credits for closed amenities. I think that's fair, guys. By the way, we're seeing.
Well, just so people understand the no also, because the association is still having to upkeep the amenities. You have to still monitor, take care of the pool. You still have to do chemicals and things of that nature.
The building still has to be air conditioned, and Florida case law is really clear. Just because you don't use an amenity doesn't give you an excuse not to pay towards the upkeep of the amenity.
Right.
Yeah, great answer. And then I think the other one here is, can you assess to cover additional costs? Well, I probably answer that one. Of course you can assess to cover additional costs if you want your community open and you need the monitoring and the extra cleaning. You don't have the money in your operating budget, you certainly have the right to assess for that. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yes, and there's a process to follow.
Sure.
And you want to try to, there's 2 different circumstances, I think, for that. One is all of a sudden a big cash call because we had a windstorm blow in and you've got $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of debris that has to be hauled away, and the contractor's there and he's saying, I'm not doing it till I get a substantial payment. Well, that's going to be a quick special assessment under the emergency powers versus a proper 14-day notice to all of the membership to raise the monies and a meeting, et cetera, and so forth. So there's different things that may occur that may obviate the vote, but to the extent you can follow the statutes, you should.
Excellent, guys. Well, listen, we are through our hour. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you very much for participating again and offering your guidance. I'm sure it's extremely useful to our listeners as it is to me, so I do appreciate all of that.
Craig, can I throw 2 very quick answers? And I'm going to say, because I just saw 2 good questions. One, in Broward, do you need to wear a facial mask during gym exercise? It is not mandated in Broward to wear it during gym exercise. The other one is the order requiring quarantine when flying in from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut is still in place, that 14-day notice. So those are
Yes,
2 quick questions I saw. So those 2, thank you for those questions.
Excellent. So guys, thank you very much. Listeners, thanks for tuning in at 4 o'clock. It's definitely 5 o'clock somewhere for this president.
Now it's cocktail time, Craig.
So we appreciate having you. We'll see you in 2 weeks back.
Thank you. First round is on Craig tonight, everybody.
First round is on me, absolutely. And
Sounds good.
We both like to get a great review. So if you could leave us a review, that would be wonderful. We'd appreciate it. Guys, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Listeners,
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
everybody.
Wear your masks.
appreciate what you're doing. Take care.
Bye-bye.